All right. Hi, everyone. Go ahead and share my screen and we'll do part 2 of this situation. All right. So we're going to talk about the ways in which we think about sexuality. Maybe. It's not where we were. Let's go back. All right. Here we go. So we're going to talk about a couple of definitions here real quick. There's 2 extra ones down at the bottom called compulsory heterosexuality and heterocentric that I'll briefly touch on, but then we're going to get into much more in future chapters. So I will give more elaborate definitions when we get there. So essentialism just implies that permanence to sexual orientation, that it is static, unchanging, and innate. So this is an idea that sociologists don't often use because we have found it mostly inaccurate. But there are a lot of people who consider essentialism when they talk about sexuality. And that's one of the things we're going to talk about, is that harm in thinking about sexuality in this essentialistic type way. We're also going to talk about biological determinism, and that's the idea that sexuality is determined primarily by our genetics and instead to emphasize its social nature. So this is, again, that idea that we have sexuality based on the need to reproduce, and that's it. And that sexuality biologically is geared towards heterosexuality, and that's it. And there's a justification for it, and we reproduce, and we're like all the other animals, and poof. That is not an accurate depiction of how complicated human sexuality is. And we have consistently lacked in our ability to find genetics that link up to, or specific genes that link to, our sexuality. And in that quest for proving biological determinism, we generally ended up proving a more socially constructive theory. And so we're going to end up talking about that a lot more in this class, because we have a lot more evidence and a lot more data that suggest that sexuality is based on social construction than we do that it is based on biological determinism, or that there's an essentialistic idea of what sexuality is. So these are kind of those things that you end up seeing a lot when we talk about historical or even current event type debates on policies that use sexuality as a form of as a way in which to discriminate against other humans. And so we're going to talk about how these ideas get thrown into that mix as we move through the semester. Again, we talked about social construction a lot, but we'll reiterate, it's that idea that our social world impacts how we view our identity and the identities of others. More broadly, is that our social world greatly impacts our options, choices, norms, ideas, and possibilities. And that the social construction is shown through changes in time, space, geographic region, culture, ideas, laws, institutions, and learning processes. And we're going to talk about socialization within that social construction. So how we learn how to be humans within our own society is done through socialization. So it's that process by which we learn how to interact with others, interact with our social world, how to be a social human, and how to relate with others within that society. This is done using social norms, social sanctions, rewards, stigmas, stereotypes. We have a lot of different varieties of ways in which we utilize social mechanics to create social control. And that's how we learn what we should not do or what we should do, and what the outcomes are when we choose either option, right? And so we use many different institutions and different places for socialization. You learn how to be a human, not just through your social, like actual education, but you learn it through interactions with strangers. You learn it with your friend groups. You learn it with your parents, teach you a lot of social learners, like your very core beginnings of families teach you how to learn that. You learn it through your religious institutions. You learn it through other social institutions like laws. Like government, like trying to think, media is a big one. So you have all these different social institutions and different social varieties of social situations in which we learn how to be social humans. And that's what socialization is. It is all of those different moments that we have that we are being programmed how to interact and how to be a person within that society. All right, so moving on, we're going to talk about stereotypes, and we're going to do that probably a lot in this class. And then we're going to talk about the binary. I have a lovely, cute little graphic up here that talks about how we're going to break that binary and how the different kinds of binaries we create within our society impact and kind of mix when we talk about that, when we talk about sexuality. So we're going to talk about, like, again, we'll talk about not just the sexual binary, but we'll also talk about the gender binary. We're also going to talk about race binary, options of white versus not white. We're going to talk about all sorts of different things that end up happening and the ways in which we homogenize all sorts of different people into categories that don't really exist or that don't really match that person's actual identity or characteristics. And speaking of that, we're going to talk about stereotypes, which is the belief that a person will be or will act a certain way based on false homogenizing ideas of an entire group of people within a particular trait. And homogenizing just means that we are taking a whole lot of things and making it all seem like one. So an example of this would be like all redheads are angry. Okay, as a redhead, I'm generally not an angry person. However, that doesn't mean that there are not angry redheads, but it means that we have homogenized or created all redheads and given them one characteristic for an entire group of people that have multiple different personalities and multiple different ways of expressing any kind of emotion. And we've homogenized them or made them all the same and given them this one trait of angry. Right. And so that's what we mean by homogenizing. So you do that when you think of like the term people of color. Okay. Being a person of color can mean a variety of different nationalities, a variety of different ethnicities, a variety of different racial expressions, a variety of different identities. So, but we homogenize them into one term called persons of color. Okay. And while that term is more politically correct or more, I don't even like that idea either, it's more effective or less damaging than some of the other terms that are used for some of these groups, we're still homogenizing an entire vast amount of people into one particular term. And that's really what stereotyping does, is homogenizes one identity into having particular traits or particular ways of acting that are not accurate, because there's no way that everybody within a particular characteristic or a particular identity are going to act the same way, because humans have too many variations and we learn how to be humans in too many different settings and have too many different historical backgrounds and biographies to all act the same. And so that's just, be careful of those, because especially when you talk about sexuality, there are a lot of homogenizing stereotypes that are very, very, very inaccurate and lack the depth and perplexities that make up how humans interact with the world. And so again, these beliefs are cultural and they vary, and these beliefs, instead of beliefs, I will fix that, are false and often cause discrimination and harm. And again, we've talked about the sexual binary already, but I'll reiterate that. It's the idea that one has to be either gay or straight, that you have to pick a side, that these sides are fixed, and it's maintained by these very rigid boundaries that don't really exist, and it denotes the idea of fluidity. So, all right, moving on. We're going to talk about heteronormativity. We're going to talk about this a lot. I found this entertaining, so I went ahead and put that little meme up there just to give you guys a little chuckle. But heteronormativity is this idea that heterosexuality is natural, normal, inevitable, and the preferred sexual orientation. It confers privilege to those who conform to those social norms. This is also tied to homophobia and transphobia, and it usually is adhered within that sexual binary and without fluid ideas of are without fluid ideas of heterosexuality. So again, that very rigid box that doesn't have room for exploration, that doesn't have room for change within sexuality over a life course, that doesn't have room for a lot of wiggle. It's used as a way to actualize oppressive forces. And by that, I mean, it's used as a, well, if this is the norm, then we can deny maybe marriage for queer people because they're not fitting this norm, and marriage only is defined through this norm, right? So it's a way in which to actualize oppressive forces. And we will be discussing this a lot throughout the semester. So this will not be the last time you hear this word, but it's a good thing to kind of get a handle with, or start kind of, I don't know, planting those seeds as we move into the course. Mononormativity is just the dominant assumption of the normalness and naturalness of monogamy. This is a very Western idea. This idea is also relatively new, historically speaking. So we're talking maybe the last, not even 200 years. And this idea is tied to, again, that heteronormativity, that idea that it's a man, a woman, they get married, poof, that's the end of life, right? And it's tied to this one sexual partner idea. It's tied to links of purity, links of a lack of sex before marriage. It's linked to a whole lot of ideas that are not really actualized in our society at this juncture. However, it's also used as a way to single out particular groups here within the US, and also to single out other cultures globally. And we'll talk about this again, probably a lot more as we move through other chapters. But really, it's just that idea that monogamous heteronormative relationships are the current assumption of what your goals are for your sexuality and for your romantic interests. All right. Again, and just briefly, compulsory heterosexuality is this term and this idea that women are going to innately be drawn towards heterosexuality, and that because of that, there's going to be this reoccurring need to do that even within other social dynamics relationships. And that we'll get into a little bit more as we move forward too, and we start talking about theory. And then heterocentric is just this idea that heteronormative relationships are placed kind of center to, or central within our presentations of our society. So they're the ones that you're going to see in advertising. They're the ones you're going to see more often in media. There's the ones you're going to see that are going to be seen lifted up within, I don't know, political atmospheres, within all sorts of different other arenas, right? That these are going to be the things that you're going to see. You're going to see these in textbooks. You're going to see these in history books. You're going to see these relationships being talked about in this way. And they're going to get the most visibility, and they're going to be the things we center on. And we'll talk more about that as we move through the course a little bit more. So that's all I have for you for chapter 1. I will remind you that as you move through this course, there is a bonus survey. Make sure that you email me afterwards and follow the instructions that are on the survey. Make sure you check out your projects folder, and make sure you check out your syllabus things as well. Within this module, you'll also have your first quiz to do and your first discussion boards that are all should be linked in there. Let me know if you have any questions. I'm always here and free to answer them. I am open for any questions you have about the lectures, the terminology, why I've added what I've added to them. If you have questions about that, please come to me. I hope you all have a wonderful first module, and I look forward to the rest of this class. All right, everybody. Bye.